I'm Layla, 28, and 4 years ago, I packed my life into 3 suitcases and left Philadelphia without telling my parents. They were too busy celebrating my brother Cameron's every mediocre achievement to notice I'd moved across the country. Now I run a successful tech company in Denver, and suddenly they're calling daily wanting to reconnect after seeing my feature in Business Insider. Funny how my newfound wealth has made me visible again. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, this story might feel familiar. Stick around to see how I finally set boundaries. Growing up in the quiet suburb of Haverford outside Philadelphia, I learned early that no matter what I accomplished, it would never outshine my brother Cameron's existence. Our modest 2-story colonial home on Maple Avenue housed 4 people, but only 3 seemed to matter. My parents, Robert and Diane Thompson, weren't obviously abusive. They provided food, shelter, clothing, all the physical necessities. The neglect was subtler, a persistent emotional absence whenever my achievements were mentioned, contrasted with overwhelming enthusiasm for anything Cameron did. He was 3 years younger, and from his birth, the family dynamic shifted permanently. I still remember my 10th grade science fair. I'd spent months developing a complex environmental analysis project that examined local watershed pollution. My project won first place and qualified for the state competition. That same week, Cameron scored his first goal in a junior varsity soccer game. Guess which accomplishment warranted a celebration dinner? While I heated up leftovers and studied for my AP exams, my parents took Cameron for a special dinner at Maggiano's. They didn't even ask if I wanted to join. "Your brother needs the encouragement," Mom explained when I questioned why my academic achievements were treated as expected, while his middling athletic performances received parades. "You've always been naturally smart, Layla. Cameron struggles more." That pattern continued throughout high school. I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA, became editor of the school newspaper, led the debate team to nationals, and participated in multiple community service projects. Cameron maintained a C+ average, occasionally scored in basketball games, and played video games. When my SAT results came back with a perfect 1600 score, my father glanced at the paper and said, "Good job," before returning to his newspaper. 2 weeks later, when Cameron got a C+ on his math test after previously failing, my parents took the entire family out to celebrate his improvement. I sat at that restaurant picking at my pasta, wondering if I was invisible. I became the default babysitter, tutor, and emotional support for my brother. While my parents attended every one of Cameron's games, they made it to exactly 2 of my debate tournaments throughout 4 years of high school. "Someone needs to be there for your brother," was the constant refrain. By junior year, I stopped telling them about my accomplishments. I accepted academic awards, scholarships, and recognition from teachers without mentioning them at home. I worked part-time at the local library and saved every penny, knowing that self-reliance was my only reliable path forward. The clearest message came during my high school graduation. As valedictorian, I would be giving a speech. The ceremony was scheduled months in advance, but when Cameron's baseball team unexpectedly made it to a regional tournament scheduled for the same day, my parents didn't hesitate. "We're so sorry, honey," my mother said, not looking particularly sorry at all. "But this is such a big opportunity for your brother. You understand, right? Ms. Winters next door said she'd record your speech for us." I stood at the podium that day delivering my carefully crafted words about the future and opportunity to an audience that didn't include my own parents. I scanned the crowd and saw other families, mothers dabbing proud tears, fathers smiling broadly, siblings looking bored but present. My row of seats reserved for family remained conspicuously empty, except for my elderly grandmother, who had insisted on taking a taxi to attend. That night after the ceremony, I sat alone in my bedroom, surrounded by graduation gifts from teachers and friends, and made a promise to myself: I would build a life where I was valued, where my existence wasn't secondary to someone else's, where my achievements weren't diminished by comparison. College applications became my escape route. I applied to schools far from Pennsylvania, seeking distance and independence. The full academic scholarship to University of Michigan felt like the universe confirming my decision. When I announced at dinner that I would be attending college in Ann Arbor, my father's first question was, "Isn't that expensive?" When I explained the full scholarship, his relief was palpable. Not pride in my achievement, but relief that they wouldn't need to redirect any of the college fund they'd been building for Cameron. The summer before college, I worked 2 jobs and barely saw my family. They were busy with Cameron's baseball league anyway. When August came and it was time to leave for Michigan, my mother helped me pack while multitasking on her phone, coordinating Cameron's upcoming school activities. "You've always been so independent," she said, as though my self-sufficiency was a personality trait rather than a necessary adaptation to their neglect. "Cameron needs more guidance." As my father drove me to the airport, his parting wisdom was, "Don't forget to call your brother sometimes. He'll miss having you around to help with homework." I boarded the plane to Michigan, not feeling sad about leaving, but wondering if they would even notice I was gone. Ann Arbor felt like breathing fresh air after years underwater. The University of Michigan campus sprawled before me like a promise of new beginnings, far from the suffocating dynamics of my family home. My dormitory room, though small and shared with a stranger named Zoe from California, felt more like home in its first week than my bedroom in Philadelphia had in years. "Your parents haven't called yet?" Zoe asked one evening about 2 weeks into our first semester. She had daily check-ins with her mom and couldn't fathom my silent phone. I shrugged. "They're busy with my brother's senior year of high school." The truth was, I had received exactly one text message from my mother asking if I had arrived safely, to which I'd responded affirmatively. There had been no follow-up questions about classes, roommates, or how I was adjusting. Meanwhile, my social media showed me updates of my parents attending Cameron's first football game of the season, with proud captions about their star athlete. But college offered something I'd never fully experienced: recognition. My professors noticed my work ethic and intelligence. My classmates sought me out for study groups. For the first time, I wasn't living in anyone's shadow. "You have an exceptional analytical mind," my Computer Science 101 professor commented after I completed an assignment far beyond the requirements. "Have you considered specializing in this field?" That question led me down a path that would shape my future. I declared my major in computer science with a minor in business administration, discovering a passion for creating elegant solutions to complex problems. The logical nature of coding offered a clarity that human relationships had always lacked. My first real friendship developed with Mia, a brilliant engineering student from Texas, with a boisterous laugh and unflinching honesty. "Your family sounds like they're participating in some weird psychological experiment," she declared after hearing snippets of my home life. "You know that's not normal, right?" Hearing someone validate my experience was revolutionary. Throughout my childhood, I'd been made to feel ungrateful or overly sensitive for noticing the differential treatment. Having an outsider confirm the dysfunctional dynamic helped me trust my own perceptions. During my freshman year Thanksgiving break, I chose to stay on campus rather than return home. I told my parents I needed to work on projects, which wasn't entirely untrue. Their response was telling. "That's probably for the best," my mother said. "We'll be busy with Cameron's college visits anyway." Christmas break couldn't be avoided so easily. I returned to Philadelphia for 2 uncomfortable weeks, where conversation revolved almost exclusively around Cameron's college prospects, his final basketball season, and his social life. Questions about my first semester were perfunctory at best, usually followed by a quick pivot back to Cameron. "Michigan. That's in Ohio, right?" my father asked at one point, confirming he had paid absolutely no attention to where I'd been living for the past 4 months. "Michigan, Dad, it's a different state," I corrected, to which he merely nodded before asking Cameron about his latest game. That pattern continued throughout my college years. I stopped coming home for summer breaks after freshman year, instead securing internships in Chicago and Seattle. These positions not only built my resume, but provided housing and distance from my family's indifference. Phone calls home became increasingly rare. When I did call, the conversations followed a predictable script: brief questions about my well-being, followed by lengthy updates about Cameron, who was now attending Penn State on a partial baseball scholarship that my parents supplemented significantly from their savings. "Could you help Cameron with his programming assignment?" my mother asked during one of our infrequent calls during my junior year. "He's struggling with his intro computer class." The irony wasn't lost on me that they remembered my field of study only when it could benefit my brother. By senior year, I had built a life entirely separate from my family. I had friends who valued me, professors who mentored me, and a clear vision for my future in software development. I graduated summa cum laude with job offers from several prestigious tech companies. My graduation ceremony fell on the same weekend as one of Cameron's sophomore year baseball games. I wasn't surprised when my mother called with the news. "We're so sorry, honey, but we promised Cameron we'd be at his big game against Ohio State. You know how important these conference games are for his college career." I sat in my apartment after that call looking at the 2 graduation tickets I had reserved for them and felt a strange sense of peace rather than disappointment. Their absence was so expected that it no longer had the power to hurt me. I gave the tickets to Mia's parents, who treated me to a lovely dinner after the ceremony and gifted me a beautiful leather portfolio embossed with my name. "We're so proud of you," Mia's mother said, hugging me tightly. "What you've accomplished is remarkable." I accepted a position with a tech firm in Chicago after graduation, putting another 100 miles between myself and Philadelphia. I didn't frame this as a deliberate choice to my parents. I simply informed them of my decision in an email to which my father replied, "Good luck. Let us know if you need anything." The unspoken understanding was that I never would. I had learned long ago not to need anything from them while Cameron continued calling home for money support and guidance well into his 20s. My early career in Chicago bloomed quickly. I rented a small but modern apartment in Wicker Park, made friends with colleagues, and excelled at my job developing software solutions for financial services clients. My phone calls home dwindled to major holidays, and even those became shorter each year. When I did share news of promotions or projects, the response was always the same: polite acknowledgement followed by redirecting the conversation to Cameron's latest accomplishments or challenges. I was building a successful life by every external measure, but internally I still carried the weight of being the invisible daughter. I didn't realize how much I still sought their approval until a Christmas visit 3 years after college showed me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. The Christmas that changed everything came after I'd been working in Chicago for nearly 3 years. I had recently been promoted to senior developer at my firm and had received a substantial bonus. Feeling financially secure and perhaps seeking some vestige of family connection, I splurged on gifts. A high-end golf club set for my father, an expensive cashmere sweater and spa gift certificate for my mother, and even the latest gaming console for Cameron. I flew home with these carefully selected presents, harboring a small hope that tangible evidence of my success might finally elicit some recognition. The taxi dropped me at the familiar colonial house decorated with the same Christmas lights they'd used since my childhood. My mother greeted me with a distracted hug. "Oh, you're earlier than we expected. Cameron's not here yet. He's bringing his new girlfriend for dinner. You can put your bags upstairs." I dragged my suitcase up to my old bedroom only to find it completely transformed. The twin bed where I'd slept for 18 years was gone, replaced by a display case containing Cameron's high school and college sports trophies. My bookshelves had been removed, my desk repurposed as a stand for more memorabilia. Nothing in the room indicated I had ever lived there. I stood frozen in the doorway, my suitcase handle still clutched in my hand. "Oh, we needed somewhere to properly display Cameron's achievements," my mother explained, appearing behind me. "Your father built that case specially. Isn't it beautiful? You can sleep in the guest room down the hall." The guest room. In the house where I grew up, I was now a guest. I mechanically moved my suitcase to the designated room, which was impersonal and clearly rarely used. As I unpacked, I noticed the walls throughout the house had been updated with new family photos. Mostly of Cameron at various sporting events, Cameron with his college friends, Cameron's graduation from Penn State. The few photos that included me were from my childhood, as though my existence had been frozen at age 18. Dinner that evening was the final revelation. Cameron arrived with Jessica, a pretty bubbly woman who looked genuinely delighted to meet me. "I've heard so much about you," she exclaimed, surprising me. "You have? I couldn't imagine Cameron talking about me." "Well, not a ton," she admitted. "But I know you're the smart sister who works with computers." The reduction of my entire existence to that single sentence was actually more than I expected from my brother's awareness. Throughout dinner, my parents fawned over Jessica and Cameron's relationship, inquiring about her family, her career goals, her opinions on everything from politics to dessert preferences. Cameron, now working an entry-level sales position at a sporting goods company, spent 20 minutes describing a minor deal he'd closed, receiving enthusiastic praise from my parents. When the conversation briefly turned to me, I mentioned my recent promotion. "That's nice, dear," my mother said with the same tone she might use to acknowledge a stranger's comment about the weather. "Did you know Cameron might be up for assistant manager next year?" But the true breaking point came over dessert as my father refilled wine glasses and adopted his serious discussion posture. "So, Layla," he began, "your mother and I have been talking. Since you're doing so well in your career, and Cameron mentioned your company has those fancy downtown offices, we were wondering if you might be able to help out with Cameron's student loans. Nothing major, just a contribution to ease the burden a bit." I stared at him, trying to process what I was hearing. My brother had received significant financial support from my parents for college, while I had worked through school on scholarship. Now they were asking me to further subsidize his education, while my own accomplishments remained unacknowledged. "You want me to pay for Cameron's loans?" I repeated, wanting to ensure I hadn't misunderstood. "Well, not all of them," my mother clarified, as though that made the request more reasonable. "Just help out. Family supports family, right? And you're doing so well." I looked around the table, at my father's expectant expression, my mother's presumptive smile, Cameron's carefully averted gaze, and Jessica's growing discomfort with the conversation. "I paid for my own education," I said quietly. "I worked 30 hours a week while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. I didn't ask for help with my expenses, my apartment, or my career." "Yes, but you've always been so independent and capable," my mother replied, using the familiar framing that had justified their neglect throughout my life. "Cameron needs more support." Something inside me, a dam holding back years of hurt resentment and silent acceptance, finally broke. "I've been independent because I had to be," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I've been capable because no one offered to help me. The difference isn't that I needed less support, it's that I never received any to begin with." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My father cleared his throat. "Now, Layla, there's no need to be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic. I'm stating facts." I stood up, my napkin falling to the floor. "I'm going for a walk." No one tried to stop me as I grabbed my coat and walked out the front door into the cold December night. No one followed to check if I was okay. I wandered through the neighborhood where I'd grown up, past houses with warm, glowing windows, and families gathered inside, wondering how many other invisible children sat at those dinner tables. By the time I returned an hour later, the dining room had been cleared and my family had moved to the living room to watch a Christmas movie. They barely looked up when I entered. "There's leftover pie in the fridge if you want some." My mother offered, her attention already back on the screen. I went upstairs to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed. With perfect clarity, I understood that nothing would ever change in this dynamic. I would always be the afterthought, the independent one who needed nothing, the successful daughter they acknowledged only when they wanted something from her. That night, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I was done seeking validation from people unwilling or unable to give it. I was done being the family ATM while receiving emotional pennies in return. I was done with Philadelphia, with this house, with these painful patterns of interaction. I would leave, not just the house or the city, but this entire life. I would build something new, somewhere new, where no one knew me as Cameron's sister, or the independent one who needed nothing and no one. I would create a life where I was valued for who I was, not measured against someone else's yardstick. The plan formed in my mind with surprising clarity as I lay in that impersonal guest bed. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. January in Chicago was brutally cold, but I returned from Philadelphia with a fire burning inside me. The holiday visit had crystallized everything I'd been feeling for years, and now I had a mission: complete reinvention. I began researching cities with vibrant tech scenes where I could leverage my skills while enjoying a better quality of life. Seattle was too dreary, San Francisco too expensive, Austin too humid. But Denver, with its thriving tech industry, outdoor lifestyle, and distance from my past, seemed perfect. My planning was methodical. I negotiated a remote work arrangement with my company, citing the need for a lifestyle change and promising increased productivity. My boss, who had always valued my contributions, agreed to a 6-month trial period. "I never pictured you as the mountain type," he commented during our discussion. "There are a lot of things people don't know about me," I replied, realizing how true that statement was. Even I was discovering aspects of myself that had been suppressed for years. I sold most of my furniture and possessions, keeping only what would fit in my car. The lightness I felt with each item that disappeared from my apartment surprised me, as though I was shedding physical manifestations of my old self. I maintained minimal contact with my family during this time. They hadn't called since Christmas anyway, except for a brief text from my mother, asking if I'd made it back to Chicago safely. I responded affirmatively, but offered no additional information about my plans. On a crisp March morning, I loaded my Honda Civic with the remnants of my Chicago life and began the 16-hour drive west. Crossing the Mississippi River, I felt a symbolic boundary between my past and future. By the time the Rocky Mountains appeared on the horizon, I was breathing more freely than I had in years. I had arranged a short-term rental in Denver's Rhino District, a converted warehouse apartment with industrial charm and proximity to coffee shops and co-working spaces. The first week was a blur of setting up my home office, exploring neighborhoods, and acclimating to the altitude. What struck me most was the absence of history here. No one knew me as Cameron's sister, or had any preconceived notions about who I was. I could introduce myself simply as Layla, software developer and new Denver resident. The freedom was intoxicating. I established new routines. Mornings began with coffee and coding at a local cafe. Afternoons were spent in my makeshift home office managing projects remotely. Evenings and weekends became exploration time, hiking trails in the foothills, visiting local breweries, attending tech meetups. At one such meetup, I met Eliza, a UX designer with a contagious laugh and straightforward manner that reminded me of my college friend Mia. We bonded over being women in tech and our shared love of the outdoors. "How long have you been in Denver?" she asked over craft beers after the event. "Just a few weeks," I admitted. I needed a fresh start. Running from something or toward something. Her directness was refreshing. Both, I think. We became fast friends, and through Eliza, I began building a social circle of like-minded professionals. For the first time, I was forming connections based solely on shared interests and mutual respect, without the shadow of family dynamics coloring every interaction. During this time, my communication with my family dwindled even further. I sent occasional texts to maintain the barest thread of connection, but they remained vague about my whereabouts. If they noticed I never mentioned Chicago anymore, they didn't comment on it. Occasionally, my mother would text about Cameron's latest achievements or challenges, seemingly unaware or unconcerned that these updates were increasingly meaningless to me from thousands of miles away. I responded with non-committal acknowledgments. "That's great," or "Sorry to hear that." 3 months into my Colorado life, during a particularly tedious conference call, I found myself distracted by an idea that had been percolating in my mind for months. As a senior developer working with financial service clients, I'd noticed a consistent gap in the market. Small businesses struggled with accounting software that was either too complex and expensive or too simplistic for their needs. After the call, I opened a new document and began outlining a concept for streamlined accounting software specifically designed for small to medium businesses, something more sophisticated than QuickBooks, but more accessible than enterprise solutions. What began as a side project quickly consumed my evenings and weekends. I built a prototype, refining the user interface and functionality based on conversations with small business owners I met through networking events. The work energized me in a way my day job never had. This was something I was creating from scratch, something that could genuinely help people. 6 months after moving to Denver, I found a permanent apartment, a bright, modern space with mountain views in the Highland neighborhood. As I unpacked my few possessions, I realized I hadn't heard my parents' voices in over 3 months. Our communication had devolved to sporadic text messages, usually initiated by me out of some lingering sense of obligation. On an impulse, I called my mother. She answered on the fourth ring, sounding distracted. "Layla, is everything okay?" The implication that I would only call if something was wrong spoke volumes about our relationship. "Everything's fine," I replied. "Just checking in. How are you and Dad?" "We're good, busy with the Neighborhood Association fundraiser. Your father's in charge of the golf tournament this year." She paused. "Cameron's thinking about going back for his MBA." Of course, the conversation immediately turned to my brother. I listened to several minutes of updates about his career indecisions, relationship status, and weekend plans. "How about you?" she eventually asked. "Still enjoying Chicago?" I hesitated, then made a decision. "Actually, I moved to Denver 6 months ago." The silence that followed was deafening. "Denver, Colorado?" she finally asked, as though there might be another Denver I could have relocated to. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I guess it never came up." I replied, the simplicity of my answer highlighting the fundamental problem in our relationship. I had moved across the country and no one had noticed because no one had asked. "Well, how is it there?" she asked, sounding genuinely confused by this development. "It's great. I love the mountains, the tech scene is growing, and I've made some good friends." "That's nice," she said, clearly struggling to process this information. "I should tell your father. He was just saying the other day that we haven't heard much from you lately." The conversation ended soon after with vague mentions of keeping in touch better and maybe planning a visit someday. I knew neither would happen. That call confirmed what I had already suspected. My absence had barely registered in their lives. While I had been building an entirely new existence in a different state, they had continued their Cameron-centric routines without missing a beat. Strangely, this realization was liberating rather than hurtful. If they could live without me in their lives, then I could certainly thrive without them in mine. I turned my focus entirely to building my future in Denver, pouring more energy into my side project and deepening my new friendships. By the 1-year anniversary of my move to Colorado, my life had transformed completely. I had resigned from my Chicago company to work full-time on my software startup, with Eliza joining as co-founder to handle design and marketing while I managed development. We'd secured a small amount of seed funding from a local angel investor who saw potential in our concept. Our first office was a tiny rented space in a co-working facility, but it was ours. As I placed my name plaque on the door, Layla Thompson, founder and CEO, I felt a surge of pride untainted by comparison to anyone else's achievements. For my 30th birthday, Eliza and our small team organized a surprise party at a local brewery. Surrounded by people who knew and valued me for exactly who I was, I realized I had finally created the life I'd been seeking since walking out of that Christmas dinner 2 years earlier. My phone remained notably silent that day. No birthday call from my parents, no text from my brother. I found I didn't mind. The validation I had spent decades seeking from my family had been replaced by something more sustainable: self-respect and genuine connections with people who saw me clearly. What I didn't realize was that the family chapter of my story wasn't quite closed. It was simply waiting for an unexpected plot twist. Tuesday mornings were typically dedicated to product development meetings with our growing team. 3 years into building my company, Alpha Books had evolved from a side project into a successful startup with 20 employees and thousands of small business clients across the country. We had moved from the co-working space to our own offices in downtown Denver, with views of the mountains I had come to love. I was reviewing quarterly projections when my phone began vibrating repeatedly. 3 calls in quick succession from a number I rarely saw on my screen, my mother's. Thinking there might be an emergency, I excused myself from the meeting and stepped into my office. 4 missed calls and 2 voicemails. My heart raced as I played the first message, preparing myself for news of illness or accident. "Layla, it's Mom. I've been trying to reach you. Please call me back as soon as you can. It's important." Her voice sounded urgent but not grief-stricken. The second voicemail was similar with an added, "We really need to talk to you. It's been too long." Before I could return the call, my phone vibrated again with an incoming call from my father, even more unusual than hearing from my mother. Hello? I answered cautiously. Layla, finally. My father's voice boomed through the speaker. We've been trying to reach you all morning. Is everything okay? Is someone hurt? No, no, nothing like that, he assured me. Everyone's fine. Better than fine. We just, well, we just saw the article about you in Business Insider. Why didn't you tell us about your company? I leaned back against my desk, understanding dawning. Last week, Business Insider had published a feature on 30 under 30 entrepreneurs transforming their industries, with a substantial profile of me and Alpha Books. The article included a photo of me in our Denver office and detailed our company's rapid growth and recent seven-figure investment round. I didn't think you'd be interested, I replied honestly. Not interested, Layla. This is incredible. You're some kind of tech mogul now. Your mother and I had no idea. We're so proud. The words I had longed to hear throughout my childhood and early adulthood now rang hollow. My success had finally made me visible to them, but their sudden interest felt transactional rather than genuine. Thanks, I said simply. It's been a lot of work. And all the way out in Colorado, you've really established yourself there. I almost laughed at his tone of discovery, as though my 3-year residence in Denver was breaking news, rather than a long-established fact I had directly told them about. Yes, Denver's been good to me. Well, your mother and I have been talking. He continued, his voice taking on the same tone he'd used during that fateful Christmas dinner when asking me to help with Cameron's loans. We think it's high time we came out to visit you. See this company of yours spend some quality time together. It's been too long. Has it? I couldn't help asking. How long did it take you to notice I'd moved across the country? An uncomfortable pause followed. Now, Layla, we've all been busy. Communication goes both ways, you know. I bit back a reminder of the multiple unanswered texts I'd sent during my first year in Denver, the birthday calls that went straight to voicemail, the Christmas cards returned with no forwarding address requested. When were you thinking of visiting? I asked instead. We were looking at flights for next month. Cameron might join us too. He's between jobs right now, so his schedule is flexible. And there it was, the real reason for the sudden reconnection attempt. My success had made me useful again. Between jobs, I echoed. Yes, unfortunate timing, really. The sporting goods chain went through some restructuring, but he's exploring options. In fact, he was wondering if you might have any positions available at your company. With his sales background, he thought he might be a good fit. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. 3 years of silence, and their first instinct upon discovering my success was to find a way for Cameron to benefit from it. I'll need to check my schedule and get back to you about the visit, I said, keeping my tone neutral. As for jobs, we hire through a pretty rigorous process. Cameron would need to apply through the proper channels like any other candidate. My father's disappointment was palpable even through the phone. Of course. But surely you could put in a good word. Family helping family and all that. I need to get back to a meeting now, I said, ignoring his question. I'll text you about potential dates for your visit. After ending the call, I sat at my desk, staring out at the mountain view that had become my daily inspiration. 3 years of building a new life of healing from decades of emotional neglect, and one business article had brought it all rushing back. The calls and texts continued over the following days, my mother sending chatty messages as though we'd been in regular contact all along, my father forwarding articles about Denver attractions. They might visit even Cameron sending an awkwardly formal email, inquiring about potential employment opportunities at your esteemed company. I maintained polite but distant responses, eventually agreeing to a weekend visit in 3 weeks' time. As the date approached, I found myself increasingly anxious about their arrival. I shared my concerns with Eliza over dinner at our favorite restaurant. I don't understand why I'm so stressed about this, I admitted, pushing pasta around my plate. I've built this amazing life. I'm successful by any measure. Why do I still care what they think? Eliza reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Because they're your family, and on some level, we all want our family to see us and value us. That doesn't make you weak, Layla. It makes you human. But they only care now because I'm successful, I argued. Because I might be useful to Cameron again. Probably, she agreed with her characteristic bluntness. So set boundaries. Show them your life, but don't let them dictate its terms. You're not that invisible girl from Philadelphia anymore. She was right. I had changed fundamentally during my years in Denver. I had discovered my worth independent of external validation. I had built a company, a community, a home. I had nothing to prove to my parents or brother, and everything to protect. When they arrived at Denver International Airport, I was struck by how small they seemed compared to my memories. My father's hair had grayed significantly. My mother looked tired around the eyes, and Cameron appeared less confident than the golden boy of my childhood recollections. Layla. My mother embraced me with unusual enthusiasm. Look at you, a real businesswoman. That pantsuit must have cost a fortune. Her immediate focus on the material aspects of my appearance set the tone for the visit. As I drove them to the hotel I'd booked downtown, my apartment was spacious by Denver standards, but not equipped for 3 visitors. Their comments centered exclusively on external markers of success. That car must have set you back quite a bit, my father remarked, running his hand over the leather seats of my modest but new Audi. The mountains are magnificent, my mother commented, but the real estate must be outrageously expensive here. Their observations weren't about my happiness, my health, or my personal growth, only the visible trappings of financial success. Cameron remained uncharacteristically quiet in the back seat, occasionally checking his phone. I had arranged a careful itinerary for their visit: a tour of my office on Friday afternoon, dinner at a nice but not extravagant restaurant that evening, a guided hiking excursion in the foothills on Saturday, and brunch before their departure on Sunday. The schedule allowed for quality time while maintaining the emotional boundaries I needed. The office tour seemed to finally impress upon them the reality of what I had built. Seeing my name on the door, the team that reported to me, the wall featuring press coverage of our software solution, it rendered them temporarily speechless. "This is all yours," my father asked, genuine awe in his voice for perhaps the first time in our relationship. "Mine and Eliza's," I corrected, introducing my co-founder, who had graciously agreed to join the tour, despite her misgivings about my family. "Layla is the brains behind the entire operation," Eliza said pointedly. "Her coding architecture is revolutionary for the industry. We wouldn't exist without her vision." I shot her a grateful look for the deliberate emphasis on my contributions. As we walked through the development department, Cameron finally spoke up. "So this is where I'd be working if there were any openings." The directness of his question after barely 30 minutes in my office took me aback. "Our development team requires specific technical skills," I replied carefully. "But that's not a discussion for right now. Let's continue the tour." Dinner that evening at a farm-to-table restaurant with mountain views started pleasantly enough. My parents commented on the food, the scenery, asked surface-level questions about my life in Denver. I found myself sharing sanitized versions of my experiences: the hiking trails I enjoyed, the local festivals, the growing tech community. I carefully avoided mentioning how I had rebuilt myself from the ground up after leaving Philadelphia, how I had learned to value myself when they hadn't. But as the main course arrived, the conversation inevitably shifted. "So, Layla," my father began, swirling his wine glass, "your mother and I have been thinking. It's been too long since we've all been together as a family. We miss you." The sudden declaration of familial longing after years of minimal contact rang false. "It has been a while," I agreed neutrally. "We were thinking maybe you'd consider moving back closer to home," my mother suggested. "There must be plenty of opportunities for someone with your technical abilities in Philadelphia, or you could run your company remotely." "I'm established here," I replied. "My company, my friends, my life, they're all in Denver now." "But family is important," she insisted, "especially as we get older. Your father and I won't be around forever, you know." The emotional manipulation was so familiar it almost made me smile. Before I could respond, Cameron jumped in. "Speaking of your company," he said, abandoning any pretense, "I've been looking at your website and I really think I could contribute to the sales team. My experience at the sporting goods store gave me a lot of insight into customer relations." My parents nodded encouragingly, clearly in on this planned approach. "Cameron's been having a tough time since the layoff," my father added. The job market in Philadelphia is brutal right now. He's been living with us again, my mother continued. Which is fine, of course, but a young man needs his independence. I set down my fork and looked at each of them in turn. These people who had shaped my early life through their absence as much as their presence. In their expressions, I saw not love or genuine interest in reconnecting, but calculation. I was a resource to be tapped, a solution to their problems. Let me be direct, I said calmly. I understand that Cameron needs a job. I understand that you're concerned about him. But I didn't create my company to provide employment for family members without relevant qualifications. Cameron's face flushed. I have a business degree. From Penn State with a C average, I replied, remembering the celebrations that had accompanied each of his mediocre accomplishments. My development team has PhDs in computer science. My sales team has years of experience specifically in SaaS products. This isn't a sporting goods store, Cameron. Well, excuse me for not being a computer genius, he snapped. We can't all be perfect like Layla. I'm not perfect, I said quietly. I'm hardworking. There's a difference. My mother reached across the table, patting my hand in that dismissive way I remembered from childhood. No one's saying you haven't worked hard, dear. We're so proud of what you've accomplished. We just thought since you're doing so well, you might want to help your brother get back on his feet. Like family should, my father added pointedly. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I've been thinking a lot about family since you called about visiting. About what family means, what it should provide. They nodded, clearly expecting this to lead to my capitulation. Family should notice when a member moves across the country, I continued. Family should remember birthdays and accomplishments without needing a magazine article to remind them. Family should value each person equally, not create a hierarchy of worthiness. The table fell silent. I don't say this to be hurtful, I added. But I need you to understand something fundamental. I built this life without your support, interest, or involvement. I'm happy to reconnect and build a healthier relationship moving forward, but I won't allow that relationship to be transactional. Transactional, my father repeated, offense coloring his tone. We're your parents, not business associates. And yet, the first substantive conversation we've had in years centers on what I can do for Cameron, I pointed out. Not who I am, not what matters to me, not how I've changed or grown, just what resources I can provide. That's not fair, my mother protested weakly. Isn't it? I met her gaze directly. When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you asked about my hopes or dreams or challenges without immediately changing the subject to Cameron? She had no answer. Cameron, meanwhile, had retreated into sullen silence, his familiar response when not being the center of attention. I would like to have a relationship with all of you, I continued, softening my tone. But it needs to be based on mutual respect and genuine interest, not obligation or utility. And what does that mean exactly? My father asked warily. It means I won't be offering Cameron a job at my company. It means I won't be moving back to Philadelphia. It means if you want to be part of my life, you need to see me, really see me, as an individual, not just as a resource or an afterthought. The remainder of dinner passed in uncomfortable conversation about neutral topics. Back at their hotel, our goodbyes were strained with tentative plans to meet for the scheduled hike the next day hanging in the balance. In my apartment that night, I felt not regret, but relief. For the first time, I had directly addressed the dysfunction that had shaped our family dynamic. I had stated my needs and boundaries clearly. Whether they could meet me in this new territory remained to be seen, but I had finally given voice to my truth. The morning brought a text from my mother. Not feeling well, need to rest today, rain check on the hike. I wasn't surprised by the avoidance tactic. Of course, feel better. Let me know about brunch tomorrow. I spent the day instead with Eliza and friends hiking the trail I'd planned to show my family, feeling lighter with each step away from the expectations and disappointments of the past. Brunch the next day was a subdued affair. My parents maintained polite conversation, careful to avoid any mention of Cameron's job prospects or my potential return to Philadelphia. Cameron himself oscillated between forced cheerfulness and barely concealed resentment. As we said goodbye at the airport, my mother hugged me with unusual sincerity. I'm sorry we haven't been more present, she said quietly, surprising me with this acknowledgement. Seeing your life here, what you've built, it's made me realize how much we've missed. It wasn't a complete reckoning with the past, but it was something, a small crack in the facade of denial they had maintained for so long. Thank you for saying that, I replied. It means a lot. My father shook my hand formally, then pulled me into an awkward hug. You've done well for yourself, better than we could have imagined. Cameron's goodbye was brief and non-committal, his disappointment at returning to Philadelphia empty-handed, evident in his posture. As I watched them disappear through security, I felt neither triumph nor sadness, but a quiet resolution. I had confronted the patterns that had defined my life for so long. I had spoken my truth without anger or blame, but with clarity and strength. Driving back to my apartment, to my life, I recognized that true healing didn't come from revenge or validation from those who had hurt you. It came from building something new, something entirely your own, and recognizing your inherent worth, independent of others' ability to see it. The invisible daughter had become visible, not because others finally noticed her, but because she had learned to see herself clearly and value what she saw. 4 years have passed since that weekend visit that changed the dynamics of my family relationships forever. Alpha Books has continued to grow, recently expanding into international markets and opening a second office in Austin. My life in Denver has deepened and flourished with friendships that have matured into chosen family and professional accomplishments that bring genuine satisfaction. The relationship with my biological family has evolved in unexpected ways. After returning to Philadelphia, my parents went through what appeared to be a period of genuine reflection. The conversations that followed weren't always easy, but they were necessary. My mother called about a month after their visit, her voice hesitant but determined. I've been thinking about what you said at dinner that night, she began. About us not seeing you. I think you were right. That acknowledgement opened a door to more honest communication than we'd ever managed before. Over time, through sporadic phone calls and occasional visits, we began building something new. Not the close-knit relationship depicted in sentimental movies, but a respectful adult connection based on who we are now, rather than the painful patterns of the past. My father found it harder to acknowledge the imbalances in how they had parented Cameron and me. But in his own way, he made efforts to know me as an individual rather than just in relation to my brother. He asked questions about my business that showed genuine interest, sent articles about hiking trails in Colorado, remembered my birthday without prompting. Cameron and I have maintained a more distant relationship. The entitlement that characterized his reaction to my success didn't disappear overnight, but losing his position as the unquestioned center of the family universe forced some necessary growth. He eventually found a job in marketing for a local Philadelphia company and moved out of our parents' house. Our conversations are infrequent but civil, no longer defined by his expectations of what I should provide. Last Christmas, I returned to Philadelphia for the first time in years. The house was physically the same, but the emotional landscape had shifted. My old bedroom had been converted back from Cameron's trophy room to a neutral guest space. There were recent photos of me on the walls alongside those of my brother. Small changes, but meaningful ones. During that visit, my mother pulled me aside after dinner. I want you to know, she said, her eyes meeting mine directly, that I'm proud of you, not just for your success, but for your strength, for being brave enough to leave when you needed to, and for being generous enough to give us another chance when we didn't deserve it. Her words healed something in me that I hadn't realized was still wounded, not because I still needed her approval, but because they represented a fundamental shift in how she saw me. Not as the independent one, who needed nothing, but as a person who had legitimate needs that had gone unmet. The journey from invisible daughter to visible valued individual wasn't linear or perfect. There were still moments of old patterns resurfacing, of feeling overlooked or undervalued. But those moments no longer defined me or determined my worth. The most profound change wasn't in how my family saw me, but in how I saw myself. The girl who had packed her life into 3 suitcases and driven west seeking validation had become a woman who understood that her value was intrinsic, not dependent on others' recognition. In building a life entirely my own, a successful company, meaningful friendships, a beautiful home in the shadow of mountains, I had discovered that the approval I'd sought for so long was ultimately less important than self-respect and authentic connection. I no longer needed to be seen by those who had overlooked me. I had learned to see myself clearly, to recognize my strengths, and accept my vulnerabilities, to create boundaries that protected my well-being while allowing for genuine relationship. The invisible daughter had not only become visible, she had become whole. Have you ever felt overlooked in your own family? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else feeling invisible right now. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Remember, sometimes the family we create is more important than the one we're born into. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you find the strength to create a life where you are truly valued, whether that's with your biological family or the one you build for yourself.